Do you like dick jokes? Welcome back to Levity Book Reviews. My name is Liam and I hope you're reading well. Today we're talking about Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. Gravity's Rainbow is a 1973 masterpiece of postmodern fiction exploring the senseless chaos of nuclear warfare during World War II and the Cold War. The basic premise of Gravity's Rainbow is that Allied forces are tracking down an American Lieutenant Slothrop who seems to be sighted everywhere the V2 missiles are falling in London, England. So the story begins with two detectives of psychological warfare. We have Pointsman and Mexico, my favorite characters in the book. They discover in an asylum a map showing that wherever Tyrone Slothrop has been and had sexual activity is where the V2 missiles are falling. Pointsman, being a psychologist, believes that Slothrop's erections are somehow guiding the missiles to England, whereas Mexico, a statistician and rationalist, is saying that it's simply probability is causing the bombs to drop where they do based on something called a Poisson distribution, which you may have heard of if you've done some higher statistics. From here, the book is a hunt to track down Slothrop to find out why and how he is involved with the V2 bombings. And there are so many red herrings in this book that it's very complex and continuously surprising. There are very many real references to the war that will go right over your head. Thomas Pynchon's history is important for understanding Gravity's Rainbow. He worked as a technical writer for the safety manuals of Boeing's only ground-to-air missile. This was the only surface-to-air missile deployed by the US Air Force called the SIM-10 BOMARC. So Pynchon worked on anti-aircraft missiles designed to shoot down planes or V2 missiles. For this book, I believe Pynchon was drawing from his experience on thinking of how to target V2 missiles. The V2 missiles were the first long-range guided missiles employed by the Germans to bomb Allied cities in retaliation. I think Pynchon is trying to suggest that Germany's response with the V2 bombings were irrational, and therefore trying to predict them is like trying to understand senseless hatred. And the abstract slapstick humour of Gravity's Rainbow is trying to deconstruct and criticize how stupid nuclear war crimes are, and the paranoia of civilians living in the consequent chaos of dying by bombs that were heard before they could even be seen. I think for this book and his many other books, Thomas Pynchon is overdue the Nobel Prize in Literature, as many other people also think. Gravity's Rainbow is often regarded as one of the greatest American novels written after World War II, which is ironically an insult to American culture because Thomas Pynchon has lived in anonymity because what he leaks is subversive counterculture fiction. Nobody knows who Pynchon is, and I made a joke about this in my BookTube newbie tag video that no one spotted. But Thomas Pynchon is definitely counterculture because the last section of this book begins with the infamous Richard Nixon quote, "What?" in response to the Watergate scandal. Thomas Pynchon is a true outsider who would rather remain free and unknown rather than acclaimed and restrained by the press. And Gravity's Rainbow won the 1974 National Book Award, to which Thomas Pynchon sent the comedian Professor Irwin Corey to give the acceptance speech, even though Irwin Corey didn't know who Pynchon was or hadn't heard or read this book.
For Gravity's Rainbow, which bridges the gap between the two cultures and puts the world of manipulation and paranoia within the perspectives of history.
However, I accept this financial stipend in behalf of Richard Python for the great contribution, and to quote from some of the missiles which he has contributed. Today, we must all be aware that protocol takes precedence over procedure. However, you say, what does this mean in relation to the tabulation, whereby we must once again realize that the great fiction story is now being rehearsed before our very eyes in the Nixon administration, indicating that only an American writer can receive the award for fiction. I do want to thank you, and I want to thank Brezhnev, Kissinger, acting President of the United States, and I also want to thank Truman Capote. And thank you.
This is exactly the kind of humour that is in Gravity's Rainbow, this pseudo-intellectual slapstick that seriously raises your expectation and then just serves you some toilet humour and just completely takes you by surprise. The 1974 Pulitzer Prize was denied to Thomas Pynchon for Gravity's Rainbow because there's a scene which is so obscene where there's basically coprophagia by gavage, which means someone forces someone else to eat feces. But this is precisely what makes Thomas Pynchon's writing incredible. He writes with the freedom against what is acceptable or understandable to his audience. Pynchon doesn't care if you understand or agree, he only wants to be entertaining and witty. Gravity's Rainbow as a literary phenomenon shows that the Pulitzer Prize and the Nobel Prize in Literature favour the social good of writing over the innovation and quality of writing, because by now Pynchon would have got it. The reason I would never strongly recommend Gravity's Rainbow is it's quite long, tedious, repetitive, dense, obscene. It's not fully enjoyable for everyone. This book is the complete opposite of The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. This book is the longest dick joke ever written. Most people won't have the patience for this much silliness. I believe Gravity's Rainbow has become a rites of passage status symbol for young American males because it stands for the freedom of obscenity, it stands for condemnation of war, and it stands for a glorification of just intellectual, witty banter, and this all helps men in a society which is repressing young dudes from being dudes. But I worry that Gravity's Rainbow is overhyped for the general population, for people who are just too young to understand it to its full potential. The problem is that most young men, including myself, don't have the historical knowledge to recognize the references that make this so well constructed without being told beforehand. And I also find most male readers don't read complex enough postmodern fiction to find this familiar enough to be enjoyable or enlightening. If you don't read often, you should definitely not read Gravity's Rainbow. You should instead start with Inherent Vice or maybe The Crying Lot of 49. If you've been told to read Thomas Pynchon, those would be good places to start because they're his smallest novels and they're just a lot more easy to get on board with. This will just feel like a mindless marathon that you'll get through and you'll just be empty by the end of it if you don't fully connect with this. There are also plenty of other authors that are suitable for young men to read that are way more accessible and relevant. So if you're in your early 20s, I'd encourage you to get more familiar with contemporary postmodern writers first before coming to Gravity's Rainbow. And I would definitely recommend getting a guide or summary first. I regret not reading this with a guide. So in short, Gravity's Rainbow is difficult, and for that reason I would never strongly recommend it to anyone, but it's definitely a very important and very good book. If you're ready for it, then you should definitely find this. It certainly represents a literary ideal that has been formerly undervalued and underrepresented and just never really imitated to this level. It's such high quality. It is rightly a postmodern masterpiece that deserves to be remembered by those who are ready for it. But it's a mountain of phallic humour that young readers might not be ready for. Happy reading.